Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to Between the Lines. Today, we have an interesting conversation with Sam Ryan. Sam is the CEO and co-founder of Zeelo, the smart bus platform for organizations in the US, the UK, and South Africa. With Zeelo, Sam has helped to create a turnkey mobility as a service and software as a service commute shuttle solution for employers and schools to reduce cost by up to 42%. We'll definitely talk about that. And prior to founding Zeelo, Sam exited his previous mobility company called JumpIn, which is an UberPool for communities, to Addison Lee in 2014, and then became head of product there at Addison Lee, rebuilding their digital capabilities. So we're really excited to have you on today, Sam. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Perfect. And today we're talking about, we're kind of going in niche a bit here into the shuttle space. I know there's a lot of interest right now in shuttles, kind of all over the world here as people are starting to get back into the office. But today we're talking about why an asset-light shuttle operation model is going to help save the planet. So, Sam, can you just tell me, what does that mean? What does asset-light shuttle operations mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to set the context, Andy, I'd say that certainly when private shuttle deployments for commuting, schools, etc., very few vehicles are needed all day, every day for that same purpose, right? So actually, when we think about asset-light operations, we think about, okay, well, how do we outsource some of those operations to third-party fleet operators, right? And actually use those vehicles for different use cases at different times. So like here in the UK, there's a kind of quite an archaic saying called total transport methodology, right? Which is rather than trying to serve, rather than trying to serve everybody in the same bus route, you use that bus to serve different people at different times, right? And maybe we can dive into what that means for some of our customers.
Interesting. So I think that makes sense, right? You don't need to use the same, you don't need to just dedicate one vehicle to one organization. Yeah. So this is pretty interesting. So you're saying we can serve different groups, different times. I'm assuming there's got some good benefits we'll talk about, but in practice, let's dive in. What does that really look like? So are you using the same, shuttle, the same bus to pick up some people and then going to a different group of people at a different time? Is that kind of what that means?
Yeah, exactly, right. So we as an organization will go out and sell a turnkey or SaaS solution to an employer or a school, and those employers, they're both kind of essential workers and also office-based employees, right? And all those different people need to be served at different times of day. And therefore, actually, our argument to those organizations is, hey, look, don't go out and invest in your own fleet. Hey, actually, don't even go out and contract directly with the fleet operator. We will actually consolidate all of those vehicles, right? In our case, it's mainly kind of motor coaches and buses and kind of larger vehicles that are used for shuttle operations. And we will help to optimize those across those different trips, right? And actually, lots of your audience will be aware of the kind of the bus sharing concept, right? Which is, how do we serve, multiple employers or multiple schools in the same place, and the students or the employees of those organizations will share the same bus. But actually, what we're finding is working out even more successfully for us is, okay, well, actually, how do you fill those different times of day, right? So actually, during the pandemic, we've been partnering with lots of logistics and e-commerce businesses, right? And those workers need to turn up to work at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning, right? And we're even finding time to take that vehicle and clean it and then turn it around again and take the kids to school for 9 a.m., right? And actually, from a cost perspective, the marginal cost of keeping that vehicle working a little bit harder for a little bit longer is so much smaller than serving those individual use cases separately, right? So we're really saying, to the third party fleet operators, you keep doing what you do best, right? You keep employing drivers, you keep maintaining vehicles, you keep servicing those vehicles. We will put them in the right places at the right time.
That's really interesting. I like that idea because I've definitely heard the idea of you have three companies in one spot. Let's kind of pool all of those people into one vehicle and kind of commute in together. But this is taking a slightly different approach, which is you have different companies in a region at different times. They have people coming in. It makes perfect sense. So what does that do to? Presumably that's driving down costs to you all, to shuttle operators in some way, and then ultimately onto the kind of end user. What does that really look like? Do we know exactly how much people are saving from this particular model?
Yeah, we've proven now across a number of deployments that we can save a customer up to 40% by looking at this kind of model, as opposed to just servicing their individual use case on their own, right? And that's, probably 20-30% of that is through sharing the vehicles, and the kind of 10-15% is through the optimizations that we make by helping them to understand their demand, right? Which is, all the benefits of running a managed shuttle program using technology. So yeah, we can prove pretty significant cost benefits, and ultimately what that means is not only do those organizations save money, fundamentally it means that we can think about servicing other pockets of demand that maybe we couldn't do so in a cost-effective way before, right? And this is kind of where it comes back to this public transit desert side of things, right? Ingrained in our DNA and ingrained in the reason for running shuttles in the first place, right, is that we have too many public transit deserts or car-dependent areas, right? And actually, the reason why in many cases they're car-dependent is because the demand is only there at certain times of the day, and therefore it's actually really, really difficult to serve profitably. But actually, if we can build regional density and we can serve different use cases at different times, suddenly it becomes cost effective to service those smaller pockets of demand that maybe we couldn't do if we were just serving one company or one school independently.
That's really interesting. That was something I was going to bring up. Is it seems like now, because cost is more is optimized here, we can start to serve these underserved communities, which is obviously, certainly an issue here in the United States and in Canada, in North America. I'm sure similarly in the UK and in South Africa, we certainly have pockets. So what does that mean though to a commuter? They now have a solution outside of a car, maybe for the first time ever. Are people excited about this? Are people saving money? What is kind of the benefit to the commuter on that end?
Yeah, sure. Look, the first, which is again what was talked about in these kind of conversations a lot more, is this kind of concept of commuting as a benefit, right? And this is primarily kind of office-based organizations. How do I not sit behind the wheel of the car and instead I can be productive? Or actually what we find more often than not is people sleep with the extra hour they have on the bus. Maybe they can spend more time with their families, right? And actually, as we think about hybrid working, I think that becomes really, really important as employers think about, how do I encourage people back to the office for 2 or 3 days a week? And let's not open that hybrid working can of worms just yet.
Different conversation.
But the other side of that, which we're super interested in, actually is in the kind of essential worker segment, and we call it we broaden it to the hands-on industries, right? So this is people that working in e-commerce, logistics, manufacturing, etc. Sure. And actually, so many of these work locations are in difficult to get to locations, and actually many people that want these jobs in these locations live in even actually in urban areas where they need a reverse commute, or they live in another kind of suburban area or an area that is currently car dependent. And actually often they come from a one car household, or they come from a household where they can't afford a car at all, right? So actually providing transportation ends up being the link between them turning up for the job interview in the first place, let alone getting the job and staying there, right? So actually we're working, in the US and in the UK and indeed in South Africa, with a number of employers now that are using our service as a way of connecting to potential talent, right, and helping to retain them. And we think about as a business impact in two ways, right? So I know the question here today is how do we save the planet? Well, we think about it in two ways actually. It's okay. Well, modal shift from private car transportation into shared transportation, number one, but also two is how do we give people access to employment and education, right? And actually, some of our employee customers we've been surveying and trying to understand the employment dynamics, right? And some of the players in this kind of e-commerce and logistics space are saying that 30% of the people don't turn up to the job interview in the first place because they can't get there, right?
Wow.
And that's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, really, all of this comes down to, maybe just like one word is equity. We can finally kind
Yeah.
of really hone in on that. And I know that's been an issue. I mean, it's obviously an issue everywhere, but certainly it's an issue with, as you call them, the hands-on industries, opening up new work for these, for this workforce, opening up new opportunities, making it accessible to get to work and make a living, which is really interesting. I mean, I think that's honestly of all the things here, that might be the most exciting piece of it because that's always been a challenge
Yeah.
with mobility is how do we serve these communities that aren't already served by public transit. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And yeah, and just to add on that, if I may,
Yeah.
we have a different kind of mentality to think about equity and inclusivity than traditionally how kind of public transit planners have thought of it, right? Which is, it's always been about how do we make a bus route or a rail route or whatever the form of transport is, how do we make that serve everybody at once, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how does the same bus route take people to the hospital, it takes people to work, it takes people to school, it takes people shopping, right? And we fundamentally think that's the wrong way of thinking about it, apart from in super high demand populous areas, right? Because
Sure.
actually what happens is the experience gets diluted for everyone. And therefore ridership sinks, and therefore too much subsidies are needed, and therefore those bus services or those rail services get cut, right? And
Right.
it's a horrible virtuous cycle, right? And we are like right in that right now, given everything that's happened over the last 18 months, right? So we're saying actually you can serve these pockets of demand and give access to transportation to these groups of people at the times they need it, right? But serve them separately and serve them at different times of day, right? Ultimately, the most simple example I can give is, think about a big Amazon warehouse, right? If the shift patterns are 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., people don't need to be able to travel between those locations between those
Right.
shift times, right? So just run it at the times they need it, right? And then use the vehicle for other things in the middle of the day. And that's our kind of whole methodology, and it's a big shift from how transit planners have thought about equity and inclusivity before.
I love it. I mean, it makes perfect sense, and it kind of gets into a lot of the conversations we've had in other episodes here. Really, in transportation demand management (TDM), we're saying, hey, let's look at each individual kind of more specifically. Let's look at their use cases and let's solve their use cases. We don't need to try to come with this bucket solution. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
I think everyone's experienced where it's like, well, sure, I can take the bus at noon. Well, I don't need it at noon. I'd rather it come 10 times during my commute range so I don't have to wait 10, 20 minutes. So it makes perfect sense. And you're getting to kind of, I think, the other key point of this whole idea of asset light shuttle operations, if we call it that, is dynamic, kind of the dynamic aspect of it. So being able to adjust supply to meet demand, shift supply to meet differing demands at different times in different places. And I mean, presumably, I would assume this is able to drive up the occupancy levels. Once again, driving down that cost and emissions. More people on a vehicle means less emissions per person. But what does this really mean? Like, how does an organization like yourselves go about adjusting the demand, or adjusting supply to meet demand? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. And it's a great question. So, when we deploy new services, sometimes we're taking over an existing program where, they've been running a shuttle program for a number of years, but maybe they don't have the data or insight to be able to make those optimizations. And sometimes we're implementing a program for the first time, right, where we're using our software to predict where the demand should be and then optimizing on an ongoing basis. And with optimization, it's always a balance of, I guess, three different factors, really. It's like, certainly with commuting, people want certainty, right? So if you change something too often, that's not a good experience for people, right? And lots of people sell the on-demand dream, but for commuting, on-demand's not that great, right? It's like, actually, when you wake up in the morning, you want to know where you're being picked up from, and you want to know you can actually get a ride, right? That's really important. And then the second thing is flexibility within that, particularly for office-based environments. You know, if you and I are sat here and we end up chatting for 45 minutes and I'm about to get on a bus, I need to be able to hop on the next one, right? So therefore, you can't ever get something to 100% occupancy. Sure. So there's kind of all those different factors that we have to think about balancing. In a pre-pandemic world, we were able to achieve about 80% occupancy, which allowed us to keep that flexibility within the network, that people can move between different service times if they need to, but also drive significant cost efficiencies for the employer or the school. And actually, what we find more often than not is that even when we take over an existing service, we can make a real immediate impact, right? We come in and we realize that actually there's 3 people on this bus and there's 50 people on this bus, right? And it could be a combination of adjusting schedule, route, vehicle size that gets the right mix, right? So we incentivize our teams, which sometimes investors struggle with when I explain this to them, is like, I incentivize my team to drive the cost of a contract down, right? Because actually it's all about driving the cost per passenger down, because ultimately that will allow us to increase the size of the program and give access to more people within the program. But it's not just actually about the services themselves when we think about optimization when they're running. It's also about the operator selection, right? So actually, by having an asset-light model, we can combine different fleet operators based on their location, right? Which also helps to reduce costs and also helps to reduce dead mileage, which is, actually a big, often transit operators don't track the dead mileage in their impact assessment, right? But it's super important, sure. Right?
Can you define dead mileage for us, just in case people don't know what?
Sorry, yeah. So but the time that the vehicle's traveling from without anybody on it, right? Which could be from the depot to the first pickup point, or it could be the return leg of the trip when nobody's traveling that direction, right? And actually, the holy grail is, how do you reduce that dead mileage and how do you fill the empty leg, right? That we think a lot about that as a business, right? And that's how asset-light operations become super important. So, even chatting through with you, Andy, it even makes me think more and more. My mind's always spinning about, there's so many different pockets of optimization that ultimately reduce cost and ultimately help to save the planet, because we're able to provide this service more cost efficiently to more people, right? And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think, thanks for defining that and for walking through all that. It's really interesting. I think people might understand kind of dead mileage in like the Uber or Lyft context, where if someone's driving to pick you up, really your trip is them driving to pick you up, then them taking you to where you need to go, and then them driving to the next spot. It's the same thing with the shuttle, and people probably don't think about that, right? It has to drive from the depot, it has to get to wherever its stop is. I think that's really interesting. Yeah, that's why have them drive miles and miles when they can, when we can optimize that? It makes a lot of sense. So, I think you kind of mentioned a bit, but I'd like to just hear a bit more, maybe concretely. This seems like the perfect thing, the perfect model that would have worked well during the pandemic or during some sort of like unexpected change in habits, because of the ability to dynamically adjust things, serve different people, different times. How did this work during the pandemic? Were you successful in being able to, shift based on whatever demand? There's not people going to maybe schools as much, or they're not going to office jobs. What did that look like for you all?
Yeah, look, it was a turbulent and somewhat scary time at times, but we pre-pandemic, we very much used to call ourselves like the Google bus for the rest of us, right? So
I like that.
Outside of the West Coast and outside of the US, shuttles weren't really necessarily a thing, right? So in the UK, employers weren't necessarily used to investing in private shuttles for their staff, right? And actually, we were really trying to democratize that. the pandemic hit, 90% of our office-based business was suspended when people sent their employees to work from home, and that forced us actually to think about these kind of hands-on industries, or the essential worker segment, as you described it, a lot more closely. And we really kind of shifted our sales efforts and shifted our operator partnerships to really be focusing on that segment. And we're lucky that it's been super successful. And actually, when I look back, we just weren't focusing on it enough pre-pandemic, right? Actually, the need has always been there, but we just weren't looking at this opportunity enough. And the great thing, going back to the kind of asset light topic and how we use these vehicles for different things at different times, lots of shift workers are turning up to work at very different times to office-based workers, right?
Sure.
So that now creates a fantastic opportunity for us to combine the two things, and actually to use these vehicles more and more efficiently. And I think, for us, as a business selling to organizations is we can give them that benefit of the fact that we're working with fleet operators to utilize their vehicles for other things as well, which means that overall they get a much better price for what they're doing with us. But also that because we provide these managed programs, and because we have the technology and optimization solution that we have, we actually can take a lot of administrative burden away from the TDM or whoever is managing the program inside the employer, or inside the school, right? So we can make them look good, right? That's fundamentally the key point.
No, that's good. And I mean, I was going to ask, kind of as a follow-up to that, why would a school want to do this? How do they benefit? But I mean, I feel like you answered it's cost, it's ease of use, and it's, employee kind of efficiency, being able to bring different employees into your workforce and making their commutes easier. But if I'm an employer or I'm a school and I'm like, this is a pretty interesting idea, what do I do? How do I start looking into this? Do I just contact you and then have a conversation with you? You know what to do?
Yeah, exactly. And then what essentially we would do is we would run a free consultation process where, we'd, similar to what you guys do, Andy, in the sense that, we'd understand where employees are traveling from, what the perceived number of days in the office looks like, or people might not have the exact answers to those questions, but we'll understand some of those different parameters. We'll look where the public transport deserts are, and then we'll try to design a more efficient solution that will probably, reduce some cost off the bat, right? But then ultimately has that flexibility baked in, right? So that we will have partnered with multiple motor coach or shuttle operators in that region, and we'll have access to, hundreds of vehicles of different sizes that we're able to optimize over time as we really start to understand how the service is being used, right? And it's obviously a combination of, making the service better, so we're increasing the number of people using it, and also on the other side, optimizing how we use the vehicles to reduce the cost.
Perfect. It's all data driven. I mean,
yeah,
words I like to hear. I think a big question we haven't said yet is, what is the CO2 impact? What could the impact be? Do you have a number you can throw out of what this can do to save, to help save the environment, reduce CO2?
Yeah, so on average, our deployments move about 30 private cars into one bus,
Nice.
or one shuttle, and that, we calculate saves about 78% of CO2 emissions, also including the dead mileage we talked about earlier on, right?
Sure.
So we've baked all of that in based on the optimizations that we make, right? And those remaining CO2 emissions, right, we are currently offsetting. So all of our services as of where we now September will be carbon neutral through offsetting, and we're also now on the path to net zero as well, right? So we are actively out there committing to fully electric bus and shuttle programs for employers and schools. The first one we'll actually have on the road in 2 weeks' time, which I'm super excited about.
Nice, congrats.
Thank you. And we're doing that by going to employers that are forward thinking and really want to make this transition. Signing long-term commitments with them and backing those long-term commitments off to our fleet operator partners, so they can actually make that transition of their fleet to electric, right? So really, it's kind of a two-step process for us at the moment. It's carbon neutral today, net zero tomorrow, and we're kind of on that journey as an organization.
That's great. I mean, I've always been a fan of Zeelo. I think we first talked a few years back. Back then, you were taking fans to football or soccer games here. I don't know if you're going to do that again once fans are coming back. Hopefully you can bring some fans to some Spurs games. Just anyone who doesn't know what that means in the U.S., Tottenham Hotspur Premier League soccer team. I know Sam's a big fan. I'm a fan. Always good to talk about. I mean, maybe not this last year. Or
maybe not right now, Andy. Maybe not right now. It's all about England in the Euros right now. So semi-finals tonight. So
I know we need to get off. Give you some time to prep for that.
Yeah. It's coming home, Andy. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. I'm rooting for him. I certainly am. We'll see. I'm excited. Okay, so final question here. We've talked about a lot. Let's kind of summarize it up for everyone in a couple of sentences here. Why will asset-light shuttle operations help save the planet?
Sure. I'll go back to that point I used right at the start, really, which is, very few shuttle deployments require a vehicle to work all day, every day, and very few shuttle deployments have the same needs every day of the week and throughout the year, right? Staffing levels change. Vehicles are needed at different times of day, right? And fundamentally, I don't believe that organizations should be investing, in asset-heavy operations. I think they should be looking to how they can essentially consume those shuttle services at the times they are needed, and work with a partner like us or some of the other managed shuttle providers out there to help them understand that demand and help them to bring the optimized supply to the table, right? And that's why, I think it makes sense. Fleet operators have been employing drivers successfully and maintaining vehicles for years and years. Let's just help them use them more efficiently, right? And that has benefits, not just on the planet, but fundamentally on costs, which, I think the two are very much interlinked when we think about how we open these up to a much bigger audience.
Yeah, that's why I love TDM. It always comes back to cost and the environment. You can do them both at the same time. Sam, it's been great. Everyone who's listening or watching, make sure you hit that subscribe button on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. If you want to see what Sam looks like or what I look like with my hair up in a man bun, I'm trying to pull off the Gareth Bale, but it's just not working. Watch us on YouTube. Follow us on YouTube. You can also subscribe to our email list to just follow along and make sure you don't miss any episodes at betweenthelines.io. It's been great having you on, Sam. I have one last question like we always do. We're building this music playlist. Some people, they just can't, they've got a long commute. They need to listen to something else. They haven't quite gotten to work. They need some music. So we like to populate that with songs from our guests. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the list?
Yeah, I got a bit greedy. I went for two, Andy, dependent on the circumstance. So when I was growing up, my dad's a classic salesperson. He went from being on the phone a lot to listening to kind of classic commuter tunes, and the one that always stuck in my mind riding in the car with him was Billy Ocean, Get Out of My Dreams, Get Into My Car. We used to kind of rock out to that one on wherever we were going. And then the second one is a bit more kind of lighthearted, which is Send Me On My Way by Rusted Roots. So yeah, they're a couple of classics for me.
Perfect. That's great. We'll add them on. I mean, I love this playlist is getting so fun. I mean, we have such a good mix of songs. And we're excited to add these two on. Sam, thanks for joining me. Good luck to England in the Euros tonight. Enjoy watching the game, hopefully. And we'll talk soon. Everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.